My wife wanted everything in the divorce: the house, the cars, the savings, everything, except our 15-year-old son. My lawyer said I was insane. "Fight for your assets," he begged. I smiled and said 3 words that shocked the courtroom: give her all. She thought she'd won, until the exhibits were revealed. Then everything collapsed. Hello and welcome to my channel. Please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Important note: this story contains some fictional elements woven in for educational purposes and deeper impact. Any names or settings that match real life are purely accidental, but the lessons, those are completely real. My wife stared at the judge and said she wanted everything. House, car, savings, just not our son. I told my lawyer, give it all to her. The courtroom went silent. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring. The kind of morning where the light coming through the courthouse windows felt too bright, too honest for what was about to unfold. Rebecca sat across from me, her back perfectly straight, her navy blazer tailored in a way I'd never seen before. Her hair was done styled for a magazine, spread not for a marriage dissolution. She looked like a woman who'd already left. Or maybe she'd left a long time ago and I was just now noticing the empty space. When her lawyer, Mara Keene, stood up to present the settlement terms, Rebecca didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look sorry. She looked hungry. Mrs. Foster seeks ownership of the marital residence at Wrenwood Drive. Mara began, her voice crisp and practiced. The vehicles, the joint savings account, the business interests stemming from the staging enterprise, and everything except our son, Rebecca said, cutting through the silence like she was ordering coffee. The Judge Klein, his nameplate read, looked up from his papers. His eyebrows did that thing where they rise in surprise before the brain catches up. Around the room, people shifted. The bailiff, a stocky man who'd probably seen 1,000 divorces, stopped his usual weight shifting. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above her keys for a second. I watched Rebecca's face as she made her announcement. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She was calm, clinical. She'd said those words to her lawyer 100 times in preparation, I realized. She'd rehearsed this moment until it felt like just another task to check off her list. 27 years of marriage. A son who still needed his father and his mother, even if he was old enough to pretend he didn't. A house we'd bought when mortgage rates made sense, and our dreams still looked the same. And she was dividing it all like she was separating furniture for one of her staging projects. Mr. Holloway. My lawyer Tom leaned toward me. I could smell the peppermint gum he always chewed in court. This is aggressive. We can fight this. There's leverage with the business liabilities alone. I didn't respond. I just watched Rebecca, watched the way she held herself. Watched the way she didn't once glance at the chair where Tyler should have been sitting, the chair she'd made it clear he wouldn't occupy. Give it all to her, I said, not whispered, not defeated, just stated like a man who'd already done all his fighting somewhere else. The words landed differently than I expected. Tom's eyebrows shot up. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. Judge Klein set his pen down slowly, deliberately, like he was buying time to process what he'd just heard. The room didn't just go quiet. It went silent, the kind of silence that has weight that presses down on your chest, the kind that makes you aware of every sound your body makes. My breathing, the scrape of chairs, the tick-tick-tick of the clock on the wall behind the judge's bench. For a moment, nobody moved. The light from the windows shifted slightly, those dust motes catching the rays, like tiny suspended lives, all of us frozen in amber. Rebecca's face flashed something: surprise, maybe confusion, but she covered it quickly with a small smile. A smile of victory, of relief, of a woman who'd gotten exactly what she'd asked for and couldn't believe it had been this easy. I signed the papers when they slid across the table toward me. My name looked smaller than usual, smaller than it had any right to be. The pen felt heavier than a pen should feel, not because my hand was shaking, but because I was aware of the weight it carried. Every signature has gravity, every one of mine did. For a second, I said to Tom later, after the judge had struck his gavel and everyone had shuffled out of the courtroom in that awkward way people do when they've witnessed something they don't quite understand. I could hear every heartbeat in that room. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Or maybe I continued looking down at the signed papers at my name at the bottom of the page. That was just mine. The silence stretched on. It wasn't the kind of silence that breaks naturally, where someone clears their throat or shuffles papers and the moment passes. This was a different kind. This was the silence of people holding their breath, of minds trying to catch up to something they'd just heard. Judge Klein looked at me over his reading glasses. His eyes did that thing a judge's eyes do, searching for weakness, for a crack in the facade. He was looking for anger. Maybe he was looking for desperation. What he found instead was a still pond. Still calm, utterly unreadable. Around the room, things had stopped. The bailiff had frozen mid-shift, one hand at his side. The court reporter's fingers rested on her keyboard without typing. Even Rebecca's lawyer, Mara Keene, had gone rigid in her chair. Her mouth slightly open, as if she'd started to say something, and then thought better of it. I wasn't looking at the settlement documents in front of me. I was looking at Rebecca. She sat across from me in that navy blazer she'd bought sometime in the last few months, something tailored and expensive that had never been in our closet before. Her hair was done the way she'd been wearing it lately, smooth and bright, not a strand out of place. Nothing like the woman who'd run her fingers through it absent-mindedly while making coffee on Sunday mornings. Nothing like the woman I'd married. She looked like a stranger in a good suit. Or worse, she looked like a stranger who'd finally found the right suit to become who she'd always wanted to be. What got me, what made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for, wasn't anger. It was pity. I looked at this woman I'd known for 27 years, and I felt something crack open inside me, not rage, but a profound sadness for the person she'd become, for the person she was choosing to be. When the settlement document slid toward me, the paper made a soft whispering sound across the table. Someone's breath caught. I could feel every eye in the room on my hands as I reached for the pen. I knew what I was doing. By signing on that dotted line, I would be signing away more than just the house we'd renovated room by room, more than the savings we'd built dollar by dollar, more than the life we'd constructed together. I would be signing away any claim to the narrative of the last 3 decades. I would be saying, you won. You take it all. And I'm walking away. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because my hand was shaking, it wasn't. My hand was steady. It always had been. It was the weight of what the pen represented. Every signature carries gravity. Every one of mine did. I wrote my name, James Patterson. The letters were clear, deliberate, the handwriting of a man making a choice, rather than having one forced upon him. The metal of the pen tip scratched against the paper, a small sound, but in that silent room it might as well have been a gavel strike. I understand what I'm doing, I said, and my voice was calmer than I had any right for it to be. I understand that I'm relinquishing all claims to the marital assets. I understand that this leaves me with very little. Judge Klein's pen hovered in the air. He was waiting for something, a break, a stutter, a sign that I might change my mind. But I didn't. I'd already changed my mind 8 months ago. 8 months of knowing. 8 months of watching. 8 months of gathering pieces of a puzzle that only I could see. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I said later when Tom was shaking his head beside me when we were walking down the courthouse steps and the afternoon sun hit us like a wall of heat. He looked at me like I was speaking a language he didn't understand. It wasn't hard to write my name, I continued. It was hard knowing what my name meant, what it represented. Every signature has weight. Every one of mine did. I folded the papers carefully and handed them over. Rebecca watched me do it. I saw something flicker across her face. Victory, maybe relief. She was already looking past me, already imagining the woman she was about to become. But I wasn't thinking about the house or the car or the savings account that was now hers to manage. I was thinking about 8 months earlier. But that choice didn't start here. It started 8 months ago. On a Tuesday morning that felt like any other morning, when a woman I'd promised to spend the rest of my life with looked at herself in the mirror and decided she didn't recognize herself anymore. 8 months earlier. Our kitchen. Tuesday morning. Rebecca sat at the granite counter with her phone in her hands, scrolling the way she'd done 1,000 times before. But this time something felt different. The sun was coming through the kitchen windows, at that perfect angle where it turns everything golden, the granite, her hair, the half-empty coffee mug I'd left there the night before. Outside, a mockingbird was going through its repertoire, cycling through different songs, like it was auditioning for something. Normal sounds, normal light, normal Tuesday morning in Dayton, Ohio. Except nothing was normal anymore. I just didn't know it yet. I was moving around the kitchen the way I always did before work, grabbing my thermos, checking the weather, running through the mental list of jobs I had scheduled. An inspection on the east side, a follow-up at a duplex that had some foundation issues. The kind of day that stretched ahead predictably the way most of my days did. I was talking about the weekend, about maybe getting to the roof repairs I'd been putting off, about whether Tyler had any games I needed to remember. The usual domestic logistics that make up a marriage after 27 years. Rebecca didn't answer. Not really. She made a small sound, not quite a response, not quite dismissal, and kept scrolling. I didn't think much of it at the time. Rebecca had always been quiet in the mornings, but looking back, I can see exactly when the distance started. Not in one dramatic moment, but in the small ones. The silences, the half-responses. The way she would sit at the kitchen counter like a beautiful, hollow thing. I'd spent 30 years in the building inspection business. I could walk into any structure and spot the problems. Rotten joists, cracked foundations, water damage creeping through walls like a slow confession. I was trained to see what was breaking. But in my own marriage, in my own home, I was blind. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. She was still in her nightgown, something pale blue that I'd bought her years ago for an anniversary. Her hair was pulled up in a way that suggested she hadn't really thought about it. No makeup. The face I'd woken up to thousands of times, and on this particular Tuesday, it looked unfamiliar in a way I couldn't quite name. "What are you looking at?" I asked, not really curious, just making conversation the way you do when you're about to leave for work and you want the goodbye to feel normal. She looked up at me. For just a second, her eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker there, something like desperation, or maybe resignation. It passed too quickly for me to be sure. Maybe I imagined it. "I don't recognize myself anymore, Jim," she said quietly. "I don't recognize myself anymore." The words hung in the kitchen air like a confession, like something she'd been holding on to for a long time and had finally let escape. Her voice was soft, almost resigned, as if she was telling me about something she'd already accepted. Not a cry for help. Not yet. Just a statement of fact from someone looking at a stranger in the mirror. I didn't know how to respond. I set down my thermos. I thought about the duplex I had to inspect. I thought about the jokes I could make to lighten the moment. Rebecca had always appreciated humor. But something in her expression stopped me. This wasn't a moment for jokes. "What do you mean?" I asked. But even as I said it, I was thinking about my schedule. I was thinking about the morning ahead. I was already mentally preparing myself for the drive to the job site. Rebecca looked back down at her phone. "Nothing," she said. "Just tired. Just tired." As if that explained everything. As if that justified the emptiness in her eyes, the way she was already slipping back into whatever world existed on the other side of that small screen. I kissed the top of her head, something automatic, something I did every morning before work, and I left. I drove to the job site thinking about foundation cracks and water damage and structural integrity. I drove there completely unaware that the most important structure in my life was already beginning to crumble. If I'd known then what I know now, would I have done anything differently? Would I have called in sick? Would I have sat down with her and really listened? Or would I have done exactly what I did? Leave for work, kiss her goodbye. Assume that Tuesday would be followed by Wednesday the same way it always had been. I don't know. But I know this: Rebecca sat at that kitchen counter long after I left, and somewhere in the depths of her phone, someone was waiting for her. Someone with words that would make her feel seen in a way I'd failed to do. Someone who would tell her exactly what she needed to hear. Someone named Victoria. For 27 years, I thought Rebecca and I understood each other. But looking back now, I can see exactly where I was wrong. The unease began nibbling at her in the small ways that problems always do. Not with a bang, but with a series of quiet moments that taken separately meant nothing. Taken together, they meant everything. It started with the praise. When you're married for more than 2 decades, you stop saying the obvious things. You stop complimenting the way she looks, because you've seen her face 10,000 mornings, and it's familiar, not because it's not beautiful. You stop noticing when she changes her hair, or buys a new dress, or puts on makeup just to go to the grocery store. These are the invisible acts of a long marriage, the way you become transparent to the person you love most. But Rebecca noticed that she'd become invisible. I was at work most days, inspections that started early and ran late. Phone calls from contractors who wanted my opinion on foundation issues, water damage, structural problems that couldn't wait until tomorrow. I was good at my job, too good maybe. The kind of guy people called when they needed honest answers, which meant I was almost never home at a reasonable hour. Tyler would be doing homework or watching TV. Rebecca would be somewhere in the house making dinner, reading, existing in the spaces I'd evacuated. When I did come home, I was tired. The kind of tired that doesn't leave room for anything beyond the basics, a shower, dinner, maybe an hour on the couch before sleep. I wasn't ignoring her intentionally. I was just elsewhere, mentally at job sites, physically present, but somehow miles away. Rebecca started scrolling. It happened gradually. Online communities here, message boards there. Nothing sinister at first, just the normal escape hatches that lonely people find. Rediscover your true self. Women who changed their lives after 40. Breaking free from invisibility. She'd sit at the kitchen counter with her phone reading stories about women who'd left their husbands, started businesses, traveled the world, become the person they were meant to be. The women in these stories weren't mothers who'd packed school lunches and driven carpool for 15 years. They weren't wives who'd supported their husbands' careers while their own dreams gathered dust. They were vibrant, self-actualized creatures who'd rejected the conventional life and found themselves. Rebecca read about them like they were saints. "Did you see this?" she asked me once, showing me her phone. A woman our age who'd left her marriage, started a design business, and was now living in Austin, Texas. She's doing what she loves. She's happy. "That's nice," I said, not really listening. I was thinking about a report I had to file. She just decided. She decided she didn't have to wait for permission to be happy. I remember looking at my wife in that moment, really looking at her, and I saw something I'd been missing. Not unhappiness exactly, but a kind of wistful longing, like she was looking at a window and trying to figure out how to open it. "You're happy, aren't you?" I asked. She smiled. That smile that meant she was going to lie, or at least she was going to say what I wanted to hear instead of what she actually felt. "Of course," she said. But she wasn't happy. She was lonely. Lonely in a way that only people in long marriages can be lonely, surrounded by family and routine and responsibility, but utterly unseen. The days when Tyler was at school and I was out on jobs stretched long for her. 8, 9, 10 hours of solitude. She'd finish her housework by mid-morning. The laundry was done. The dishes were clean. The floors were swept. And then there was just time. Empty, yawning time that had to be filled with something. So she filled it with her phone. She joined more groups. She started following accounts about self-discovery and finding your authentic self and the life you deserve. She read about women who'd reinvented themselves at 50, women who'd left comfortable lives for something more, women who were in every possible way not invisible. And somewhere in all that scrolling, somewhere in all those hours of consuming other people's transformations, Rebecca started to believe that maybe she could transform too. That maybe there was a version of herself somewhere that was more interesting, more valuable, more seen. She didn't know it yet, but she was being prepared, groomed by a digital narrative that told her she was wasting her life, that she deserved better, that the person she'd chosen to be a wife, a mother, a woman who'd built her life around family, was somehow less than, was somehow a failure. And then one afternoon, while Tyler was still at school and I was 3 hours away inspecting a strip mall, her phone buzzed. It was a message from someone named Victoria Harmon. The message was simple. Just a compliment, really. Victoria had somehow come across a photo of Rebecca from months ago, a casual moment, where she was rearranging furniture in our living room, and underneath it, Victoria had written, "I love your eye for design. You've got real talent for this." Just 8 words. 8 words from a stranger who'd noticed something beautiful about Rebecca that her own husband had stopped noticing. Just 8 words from someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Just 8 words that would change everything. Victoria Harmon wasn't like us. She was young, mid-20s, confident in the way people are when they haven't yet failed at anything that mattered. She was beautiful in a way that seemed effortless, the kind of beauty that made you wonder if she even knew she possessed it. And somehow, impossibly, she saw something in Rebecca that I'd stopped seeing. What I didn't know then was that Victoria was my niece, Catherine's daughter. My sister had moved to San Francisco years ago, and our connection had gradually frayed into the kind of distant relationship where you exchange Christmas cards, but nothing substantial. Victoria had grown up 3 time zones away, and I'd missed most of it. Now here she was inserting herself into my marriage with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Or maybe I'm being too generous. Maybe she always knew. The messages came frequently. They were carefully crafted, designed to hit Rebecca right at her weakest points. "I love your style, by the way. Seriously, you have such an eye for design." Just a compliment. Nothing suspicious, just someone noticing something beautiful. Then, "You're seriously underappreciated. The way your husband doesn't see what he has is honestly kind of sad." Then, "You deserve someone who actually notices you. Someone who makes you feel like you matter." Each message was a small cut, so small Rebecca probably didn't register them as wounds. But they accumulated. They built on each other. They created a narrative: you are not being valued. You are being taken for granted. You deserve better. Victoria was patient. She didn't push too hard too fast. She let Rebecca come to her with questions, with needs, with the hunger for validation that had been growing in my wife's chest like a tumor. "What do you do?" Rebecca asked her one night around 11 p.m. when I was already asleep and she was still scrolling through messages. "I'm a design consultant," Victoria wrote back. "I help people reimagine their spaces. It's about more than just furniture, though. It's about helping people rediscover who they really are through their environment." It was perfect. It was targeted. It was the exact thing Rebecca needed to hear. "That sounds amazing," Rebecca replied, and I could imagine her face, the way her eyes would light up at the prospect of someone who understood aesthetic, who understood transformation, who understood her. I noticed the change in my wife around this time. She started paying more attention to her appearance. New clothes, a new energy. She'd sit at the kitchen counter with her phone in the evening, and I'd catch the glow of the screen reflecting on her face. And she'd look alive in a way she hadn't in months. "Everything okay?" I asked her once. "Yeah," she said. "Just talking to someone new, someone interesting." I didn't ask who. I should have, but I was tired, and I was oblivious, and I was already miles away mentally. What I didn't understand was that Victoria was doing more than just complimenting Rebecca. She was building a specific narrative. She was telling Rebecca that her marriage was suffocating her, that her husband didn't see her, that she was wasting her potential, that she needed to rediscover herself. And the thing about that narrative is that it was partially true. I had been distant. I hadn't been complimenting her. I had been taking her for granted. Victoria just took those small truths and weaponized them. She took the legitimate ways I'd failed my wife and turned them into proof that Rebecca needed to leave me. "You need to find yourself again," Victoria wrote to her. "The woman you were before you became someone's wife, that woman is still inside you. I can see her. Why can't he?" Rebecca would read those words late at night, when the house was quiet, when Tyler was asleep, when I was asleep, when she was utterly alone. And something in her would respond to them. Something hungry. I remember one night I woke up around 2 a.m. and went to get water. Rebecca was still up sitting in the dark kitchen, with just her phone lighting her face. Her expression was one I'd never seen before. Not sadness, not anger, possibility. Like she was looking through a window at a version of herself she'd forgotten existed. "You should go to bed," I said. She startled like I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. "Just talking to Victoria." At 2 in the morning. "She's in California." Rebecca said like that explained everything. Different time zone. But that wasn't why Victoria was messaging her at 2 a.m. Victoria was messaging her then because that was when Rebecca was most vulnerable, when she was lonely, when the quiet of the house felt like judgment. What Victoria's words did to Rebecca I still don't fully understand. But I know this: they made her believe she was worth more than what she had. They made her feel seen in a way I hadn't made her feel seen in years. They gave her permission to want something different, and that permission was the most dangerous thing Victoria could have given her. Because once Rebecca believed she deserved better, once she believed that I was the thing holding her back from becoming who she was meant to be, it was only a matter of time before she started taking action to change it. The changes happened slowly at first. A haircut one Saturday morning, shorter than she'd worn it in years. It made her look younger, sharper, like someone who'd made a decision and stuck with it. Then came the clothes. Dresses she wouldn't have looked at before. Jeans that fit differently. A leather jacket she'd probably seen in a store window and thought was too bold for someone like her. But Rebecca wasn't someone like her anymore. I'd come home and find her in front of the mirror in our bedroom, standing in new outfits, turning slowly to see herself from every angle. Not the way women usually do this, checking to see if something looks right. The way someone does it when they're falling in love with a stranger they're meeting for the first time. "So what do you think?" she'd ask me, but she wasn't really asking. She was showing me. "Look what I'm becoming," her eyes said. "Look at this version of myself." "You look nice," I'd say because I didn't know what else to say. And she would in fact look nice. Beautiful even. But it was a different kind of beauty than what I knew. It was the beauty of someone who'd decided they mattered. The makeup started getting heavier. Not trashy, Victoria wouldn't have allowed that. Victoria had taste, but darker, more intentional. Lipstick in shades Rebecca had never worn. Eyeliner that made her eyes look sharper, more focused. I noticed, but I didn't understand. What I didn't realize was that Rebecca was being remade. Not just her appearance, but her entire sense of self. Every time she looked in the mirror and liked what she saw, she was reinforcing a narrative that Victoria had carefully constructed. You are becoming someone worthy. You are finally becoming who you were meant to be. And then came the business proposal. It happened over text, late one evening. I was in the living room, half watching television, when Rebecca came downstairs with her phone. Her face flushed with excitement. "Victoria has an idea," she said. "A real business idea." I braced myself. I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. "Home staging," Rebecca said. "She wants me to help her. We could consult on residential properties, help people visualize what their homes could be. It's huge right now. People pay a lot of money for it." Staging. I repeated like the word might make more sense if I said it aloud. Decorating, Rebecca clarified, reading my confusion. Temporary decorating. We'd put together a portfolio of before and after photos, target sellers who need help marketing their homes. She was speaking faster now, animated in a way I hadn't heard in months. Victoria already has connections. We could start small work out of our house. I should have asked more questions. I should have known that this wasn't actually Rebecca's idea, that Victoria had planted the seed, and Rebecca had simply watered it until it grew into something she believed was her own. "That sounds ambitious," I said. "It's perfect," Rebecca said, and she smiled. A smile I'd never seen before. A smile that looked like victory. The next week, Rebecca started taking items from the house. "It's just for staging," she explained when I noticed the good throw blanket, the one her mother had crocheted, was no longer on the back of the couch. "We need some sample pieces to show potential clients. I'll bring it back." Temporary, she'd promised. And I'd believed her because I wanted to believe her, because it was easier than asking the questions I should have asked. The vase from the hallway table disappeared next, then the decorative pillows from the couch, then the paintings from the walls. Each item gone, replaced by nothing or by cheaper alternatives that didn't quite fit the space. Our living room started to feel hollow, staged for a life that wasn't ours anymore. Tyler noticed. "Mom," he asked one afternoon, looking around the living room like he was trying to remember something he'd forgotten. "Where's the couch?" "It's at a client's house," Rebecca said breezily. "It's part of a staging project. I'll bring it back." But we both knew she wouldn't. Or she would, but only after it had served its purpose. After she'd extracted every bit of value from it. I watched my wife remake herself in pieces. New hair, new clothes, new business, new purpose. And with each transformation, she moved further away from the woman I'd married. Not because she was becoming someone bad, but because she was becoming someone who believed the narratives that Victoria had fed her. Someone who believed she'd been wasting her life. Someone who believed she deserved better than what she had. One night I found her in the bedroom again, standing in front of the mirror in a new outfit. A dress she'd bought just that day. Burgundy. Sophisticated. The kind of thing a woman would wear if she was trying to impress someone. She was staring at herself with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Rebecca." She turned, and I saw it, that smile. The one that had been missing for so long. The one that now looked like it belonged to someone else. "What do you think?" she asked. "You look beautiful," I said. And I meant it. She did look beautiful. She looked like someone who'd finally found herself. But what I didn't say was what I was thinking, that beauty is going to cost us everything. Rebecca had agreed to the business. She had agreed to become someone new. She had agreed to let Victoria into our lives and our home. And in doing so, she'd set in motion a chain of events that neither of us fully understood yet. The woman in the mirror was smiling back at her. A real smile. A hopeful smile. A smile that said, "You're finally becoming who you were meant to be." What Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Smile was expensive, and the cost was already coming due. While Rebecca was discovering a new version of herself 3,000 miles away, my sister Catherine was falling apart in San Francisco. Her marriage had been crumbling for years, the kind of slow erosion where you don't notice until one day you realize the foundation has shifted and you're standing on unstable ground. By the time Victoria was messaging Rebecca with carefully calibrated compliments, Catherine was already deep in that particular kind of loneliness that comes with being married to someone who stopped trying. She called Victoria frequently. My niece was good at listening. That was always Victoria's gift. She had that quality that made people feel like they mattered, like their problems were worth solving. Catherine would pour out her frustrations about her marriage, her disconnection from her own life, and yes, her feelings about me. James never calls, Catherine told Victoria during one of these evening calls. The sun was setting over the bay, turning everything golden and sad. He's so busy with his work, his inspections, his life in Ohio. It's like he forgot he has a sister. That's not fair, Victoria said, her voice all sympathy and understanding. You deserve better than that. You deserve a family that actually shows up for you. And Catherine, who was lonely and hurt, believed her. The calls came regularly. Sometimes Victoria initiated them, sometimes Catherine did. They talked about Catherine's marriage, Catherine's disappointments, Catherine's sense of abandonment. Victoria was there for all of it, listening with the kind of patience that felt rare and precious. But Victoria was also asking questions. Does Uncle James know how unhappy you are? Victoria would ask. Has he ever asked how things are going with you? Don't you think it's strange that someone can be so close to you and still be so far away? Each question was a small stone added to a pile, each one built on the others, until suddenly Catherine was looking at a structure she'd built, a narrative in which I was the villain and she was the victim of my indifference. But Catherine was intelligent. She was lonely, yes, but she wasn't stupid. And somewhere around week 3 of Victoria's strategic sympathizing, something shifted. Catherine was on the phone with Victoria telling her about her husband's latest dismissal of her. And Victoria asked, "Have you thought about leaving him, really starting over?" And Catherine paused. Not because she hadn't thought about it, she had many times, but because the question sounded rehearsed. Like Victoria wasn't asking it out of genuine concern, but out of some larger purpose that Catherine couldn't quite see. "Why are you so interested in my marriage?" Catherine asked carefully. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for Catherine to know she'd hit on something. "Because I care about you," Victoria said. But the warmth had gone out of her voice. It was back to being just words. "That's not what I mean," Catherine said. "I mean, why do you always ask about James? Why do you want to know so much about what I'm unhappy with?" "I'm just trying to be a good daughter," Victoria said. "Trying to support my mom." But that wasn't quite right, was it? Because Victoria's questions had never been about support. They'd been about extraction, information gathering, building a case against someone Victoria barely knew. That night, Catherine sat alone in her apartment. Her husband was working late again, or maybe he was avoiding her. She couldn't quite tell anymore, and she thought about the conversation with her daughter. She thought about the way Victoria had asked about James. Not the sympathetic questions of someone worried about family disconnection, but the targeted questions of someone building something, constructing something. "Why would Victoria care so much about my relationship with James?" Catherine asked herself aloud, the way lonely people do when the apartment is too quiet. And then, why would she care about my complaints about him? And then more quietly, what is she doing? Catherine had been a teacher before she'd had Victoria. She'd spent 20 years reading subtext, understanding motivation, seeing the things students wouldn't say directly. That skill hadn't left her just because she'd stepped away from the classroom. It was still there underneath the loneliness and disappointment. She opened her laptop. She looked up Victoria's social media, the accounts her daughter had mentioned, the design work, the consulting, the photos of staged homes and happy clients. All of it was vague. All of it was carefully curated. Nothing concrete, nothing that quite added up. And then Catherine saw something. A photo of a woman rearranging furniture in what looked like a living room. Rebecca. The caption under the photo said something about bringing out the best in a space. But Catherine recognized that this was more than just design commentary. This was something else entirely. Catherine's hands went cold. She pulled up her phone and looked at her recent calls. 12 calls from Victoria in the last 2 weeks. Each one initiated during evening hours when Catherine was alone, when she was most vulnerable. Victoria hadn't been calling to support her mother. Victoria had been calling to gather intelligence. The realization hit Catherine like a door slamming. Her daughter was using her loneliness, using her resentment toward her brother, using her complaints as justification for something Catherine didn't yet understand, but knew instinctively was wrong. Catherine sat in the darkness of her apartment and made a decision. She would find out exactly what Victoria was doing. She would understand why her daughter was so interested in her brother's marriage, and she would figure out what Victoria was really after, because one thing Catherine knew for certain was that it had nothing to do with supporting her mother. That night, Catherine began her own investigation. She saved screenshots. She documented dates and times of calls. She wrote down the questions Victoria had asked, the assumptions Victoria had encouraged her to make about her brother. For the first time in months, Catherine felt like she had purpose. It wouldn't be until much later that she understood the full scope of what Victoria was doing. But that night, sitting in the dark with her laptop, Catherine Harrison made a choice that would eventually save her relationship with her brother. She chose to question her daughter's motives. She chose to see what her daughter didn't want her to see. She chose to become a witness instead of a pawn. Catherine and I were 8 and 10 when our father left. I don't remember much about him, just the sound of his truck backing out of the driveway on a Tuesday morning, and the way my mother's hands shook as she made breakfast. But I remember Catherine. She followed me everywhere. She'd hold my hand crossing the street. When kids at school asked where our dad was, she'd squeeze my hand and let me answer first, as if she was giving me permission to be the older brother. We were a unit. That's what Mom called us. "You two are a unit," she'd say, ruffling our hair while sitting on the edge of her bed late at night. "You have to look out for each other." For years we did. Catherine was 13 when she needed help with algebra. I was sitting at the kitchen table working through the equations with her when I realized she wasn't just learning the math, she was learning how to think. She'd ask questions that made me slow down, reconsider. We'd work on problems for hours, and by the end, we'd both understand it deeper. "You're going to be good at something big one day," she told me. "You have patience. You notice things other people miss." I laughed then. I was just 15 and my sister was being sentimental, but she was right. Years later, when I became a building inspector, it wasn't just about checking structural integrity. It was about seeing what others overlooked, spotting a hairline crack in a foundation that would become a catastrophic failure, understanding the unseen damage behind finished walls. My sister had seen that quality in me long before I saw it in myself. Catherine moved out at 22. Married a guy named Richard, whom I barely knew. He worked in finance, wore expensive suits, had that kind of confidence that comes from money and the assumption that money solves everything. Within 2 years, they were living in San Francisco, 3 time zones away. I was building my own life by then. My inspection business was growing. I had met Rebecca and we were talking about getting married. Mom was aging. There was always something demanding my time, my attention, my presence. Weekends were spent on job sites, Evenings were spent with Rebecca planning a future. Phone calls with Catherine became less frequent. Birthdays sometimes fell between cracks. I didn't notice it happening the way distance compounds. By the time I realized we had drifted, there was already an invisible wall between us. Not a wall built on anger or resentment, just on absence. On the silence of missed calls, on holidays spent apart. On the understanding that we were now different people living different lives, and the ease we once had together required effort now. And effort when you're in your 30s and 40s is something you don't always find room for. Catherine felt it differently than I did. She felt abandoned. I learned this only through fragments, a comment here, a tone there. A birthday call where she said, "It's nice to hear from you," in a way that suggested she wasn't sure she would. A conversation where she mentioned that Richard had suggested they might relocate back to Ohio, but she wasn't sure if I'd care either way. Of course I'd care, I told her, but I was tired that day. Tired from a long job. Tired from marriage struggles of my own. Tired from the weight of being the responsible one. I didn't ask her to come home. I didn't fight for the relationship the way my younger self would have. Years passed. Catherine grew quieter. Her calls became perfunctory. She'd ask about my life, but she didn't really listen to the answers. Or maybe I wasn't really giving them. By the time I noticed the distance had calcified into something permanent, it was too late to go back and mark the exact moment it happened. This was the foundation Victoria inherited. Not a crack, but a chasm. Catherine was lonely in San Francisco, unhappy in her marriage, and somewhere deep down, she carried a wound, the belief that her older brother, the one who had promised to always look out for her, had chosen his career and his wife over the girl who used to hold his hand crossing the street. It wasn't entirely true, but Victoria knew how to make it feel true. When Victoria was born, I sent a gift. When she turned 5, I didn't make it to her birthday party because of a job. When she was 12, I called on her birthday and asked about school. We talked for 7 minutes. I remember because Catherine mentioned it later with a certain flatness to her voice. Vic thought you might call longer, but I told her you were busy. I was busy. I was always busy, and that busyness had a cost that I was only beginning to understand now too late to pay it back. Victoria grew up in that gap between Catherine and me. She grew up watching her mother's quiet resentment, listening to Catherine's complaints about her brother who didn't care, absorbing the lesson that people you love can leave you behind, even without leaving. And somewhere along the way, Victoria learned that if you understood someone's pain, you could use it. She understood her mother's loneliness and positioned herself as the daughter who would listen, who would be present. And in doing that, she created a space where Catherine could confess all her grievances about me, all her hurt about my absence, all the small betrayals that distance creates. Victoria listened, and then she weaponized what she heard. The first thing that disappeared was the couch Rebecca's mother had given us. It was a wedding gift, a beautiful, oversized sectional in a deep charcoal gray that had dominated our living room for nearly 15 years. We'd bought a house around it, built memories on it. Tyler had learned to crawl near it. We'd watched countless movies there, all of us piled together on lazy Sunday afternoons. Rebecca's mother had passed away 6 years ago, and that couch had become something like a talisman, a way of keeping her close. I noticed it was gone on a Thursday evening in early March. I walked into the living room after a long day of inspecting a property downtown, expecting to see the familiar shape of it in the corner where it had always been. Instead, there was empty space. Sunlight streamed through the windows and hit the bare hardwood floor, highlighting the dust outline where the couch had sat for so long. The vacuum lines were still visible in the carpet where it wasn't. "Where's the couch?" I asked Rebecca when she came home an hour later. She was bright, almost glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months. New blouse, new confidence in the way she moved through the space. "Oh, that," she said with a dismissive wave. "I took it to a client's house. We're using it to stage a living room. It's perfect for showing how a space can feel warm and inviting. I'll bring it back soon." "How soon?" I asked. "A few weeks," she said. Then she smiled that new smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked at me. "It's good for business, James. People need to see potential." I didn't argue. Something in her tone told me that argument would only start a fight, and I was too tired for a fight. So I let it go. But within 2 weeks, the dining room table was gone, the one we'd bought in that antique shop in Cincinnati 10 years ago. Rebecca said it was the perfect centerpiece for a model home. A week after that, the decorative lamps from the hallway vanished. Then the mirror from the entryway. Each time, Rebecca's explanation was reasonable, professional. Each item was supposedly borrowed, temporarily essential to her staging business proof of concept for her clients. Each time I believed her, or at least I didn't disbelieve her hard enough to do anything about it. But Tyler noticed. My son came home from school one afternoon and walked through the house the way a child walks through a museum, slowly observing, processing. He was 15 at that age where boys start becoming men, but haven't quite figured out which one they're going to be. Tall for his age, quieter than most kids. The kind of kid who notices things. He found me in the kitchen. "Dad," he said, and his voice had that particular quality that meant he'd been thinking about something for a while before saying it out loud. "Where's the dining room table?" "Your mother's using it for a client," I said, without looking up from the bills I was reviewing. "For how long?" I paused. There was something in the way he asked it. Not accusatory, just seeking information, seeking truth. "A few weeks, buddy. It's for work." Tyler nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else, but as he walked past me toward his room, I caught something in his expression. Doubt, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that something didn't add up. Over the next few days, I watched him move through the house differently. He'd pause in doorways looking at the empty spaces. He'd run his hand along the wall where a picture had hung for years. He'd sit on the kitchen floor, the place where the couch used to be, and just stare at nothing, thinking. One evening, I found him in his room with his door cracked open, his laptop open on his desk. He quickly closed it when I appeared in the doorway, but not before I glimpsed what he'd been doing, taking screenshots, writing notes, creating a document. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, Dad," he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "Just homework." I believed him, or wanted to, but as I stood there in the doorway of my son's room, I felt the weight of something shifting in the house. Not just the physical absence of furniture, but something else. An awareness, a crack in the foundation that I'd been too distracted to notice. The house had become a hollow shell, elegant, staged, and utterly cold. The rooms that had once echoed with laughter now echoed with emptiness. Our home, the place that was supposed to be our refuge, had become something else entirely. A showroom. A lie. And my 15-year-old son had figured it out before I had. He stood in the doorways of empty rooms, processing what his instincts were telling him, that his mother was taking pieces of their life and turning them into inventory, that the woman who used to tuck him in at night was now a stranger wearing his mother's face, that something was very, very wrong. Tyler couldn't articulate it yet. He didn't have the vocabulary for betrayal at 15, but he knew. Kids always know. They sense the seismic shifts in their families the way animals sense earthquakes. And in that moment, watching my son process the disappearance of our home, something hardened inside me. Not anger exactly, more like recognition, a realization that I could no longer afford to be naive. My 15-year-old son was doing something extraordinary. He was gathering evidence. I didn't know the full extent of it, at first just glimpses. A screenshot he'd quickly minimized when I entered his room. a notebook tucked under his mattress that I discovered by accident when I was changing his sheets, a pattern of careful, methodical documentation that seemed far too mature for a high school sophomore. But as I pieced it together, I realized Tyler had become an investigator. He would wait until Rebecca was distracted, then photograph the banking apps on her phone, screenshots of transactions, dates, amounts. He photographed the moving trucks that came to our house at odd hours. He created a spreadsheet tracking the items that left our home. Furniture, decor, the specific dates they disappeared. He followed Victoria's staging business account online. Screenshots of the before and after photos that she posted. Images of our furniture in other people's homes being sold as part of a staging service. He printed them out, organized them chronologically, built a narrative that even a lawyer couldn't have constructed more carefully. All of it was hidden beneath his mattress and in a locked folder on his laptop, a physical and digital archive of his mother's betrayal compiled by a boy who was still in many ways just a kid. I wanted to tell him to stop, to say this isn't your responsibility. You shouldn't have to do this. But I didn't, because part of me, the part that was waking up to what Rebecca had done, knew that his documentation might matter, might need to matter. What made it worse was watching Victoria try to manipulate him. She'd text him messages that seemed innocuous on the surface. Your mom deserves to be happy, Tyler. Don't you want that for her? Or sometimes people need to reinvent themselves. That takes courage. Or the worst one, your dad doesn't see how special your mom is. But I do. Doesn't she deserve someone who really values her? Each message was crafted to make Tyler feel like he was on the right side. Like protecting his mother meant accepting her transformation. Like questioning what was happening made him ungrateful, unsupportive, selfish. Tyler would read these messages, and something would crack inside him. Because he did love his mother. 15-year-olds don't stop loving their mothers just because they start seeing them clearly. Love and betrayal can coexist in a kid's heart in a way that's almost unbearable. So he was torn. He'd sit at his desk, looking at the screenshots he'd taken, the evidence he'd compiled, and he'd think, if I show this to Dad, I'm betraying Mom. If I don't show it, I'm betraying him. If I say something to Mom, she'll deny it, or explain it away, or make me feel like I'm the villain for not trusting her. The only thing he could do was document, keep recording, add to his archive, let his hands do what his mouth couldn't. I watched this happen from a distance, seeing the toll it took on him. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He'd spend hours in his room with his door closed. He stopped bringing friends over. He'd sit at the dining room table, the one that was no longer there, and stare at nothing, processing things that no 15-year-old should have to process. What Tyler didn't know was that I was doing the same thing. While he was documenting in his bedroom, I was documenting in the garage. I'd purchased a small digital camera, the kind that doesn't make noise, that can capture detail without anyone knowing. I was photographing bank statements, checking our accounts online, and taking screenshots of transactions. I was following the moving company's schedules, noting which items were being transported where. I was building my own archive, my own case file in a cardboard box hidden behind the workbench. We were both investigators. We were both gathering the truth. We were both preparing for a moment we couldn't yet name. But we didn't know about each other. Tyler had no idea that his father was doing in the garage what he was doing in his bedroom, that we were in some strange way protecting each other by documenting the same crimes separately, that when the moment finally came, when exhibits needed to be presented, when truth needed to be proven, we would have double the evidence, double the witnesses, double confirmation that what we both sensed was real. Neither of us was naive anymore. We'd both seen behind the curtain. We'd both recognized the lie. But we were still separate in our knowledge, still alone in what we knew, still unable to talk to each other about the thing that was destroying our family. That's the thing about betrayal that movies don't show you. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a dramatic reveal where everyone gathers in a room and admits the truth. Instead, it happens quietly. In bedrooms and garages, in screenshots and spreadsheets. In the silence between a father and son, who both know something is wrong but can't find the words to say it to each other. We were building a case, but we were building it alone. I discovered it by accident. A statement arrived in the mail on a Thursday afternoon. The envelope was standard white official looking, the kind that usually contains something important. I opened it without thinking much about it, expecting the quarterly update we'd been receiving for years. Instead, I found a number that made my stomach drop. The college fund. The account we'd opened for Tyler when he was born had been depleted by nearly 60%. My hands started shaking. I read the statement 3 times, thinking I'd misunderstood something. Thinking the numbers might mean something different than what they clearly meant. But math doesn't lie. Numbers don't change just because you want them to. The withdrawals were documented, dated. Amounts clearly listed $15,000 here, $8,500 there, multiple transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. I called the investment company immediately. "Can you tell me who authorized these withdrawals?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. The representative checked the records. "It appears your wife authorized them. She's listed on the account as a joint owner." Of course she was. We'd set it up that way. We'd been a team once. We'd made financial decisions together, assuming we always would. But things change. I sat in my office for a long time after that call, the statement in my lap, trying to process what this meant. This wasn't like the furniture. This wasn't something that could be explained away as a temporary loan for staging purposes. This was deliberate, calculated, a theft of our son's future. That evening, I confronted her. Rebecca was in the kitchen arranging flowers in a vase, one of the few decorative items she hadn't yet removed from the house. She was wearing one of her new outfits, her hair styled differently, her makeup perfect. She looked like a stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing her clearly. "Rebecca, we need to talk about the college fund," I said, keeping my voice steady. She didn't even turn around. "Okay." The statement came today. 60% of Tyler's future is gone. Now she turned. Her expression didn't change. No guilt, no apology. Just a kind of calm indifference that was somehow worse than anger would have been. "That's our money, James," she said quietly. "See, I need it for the business." "That's not our money," I said, my voice getting harder. "That's Tyler's money. That's his college. That's his future. Why would you take that?" "I'm going to pay it back," she said, turning back to her flowers as if we were discussing something trivial, as if she hadn't just erased a decade of savings that was supposed to guarantee our son's education. "When?" I asked. "Soon." "How soon?" She didn't answer, just kept arranging flowers with the kind of focused attention you'd give to something that actually mattered. That's when I understood she was never going to pay it back. The money was gone. The commitment to our son's future was gone. And the woman I'd been married to for 27 years had made a choice that confirmed what I'd been starting to suspect. She'd chosen Victoria. She'd chosen this new version of herself. She'd chosen money and reinvention over the financial security of the child we'd created together. "Rebecca, look at me," I said. She turned. Her eyes were completely empty. There was no recognition in them. No shared history. No memory of the woman who'd held our newborn son in the hospital and cried because she was so happy. No memory of the nights we'd talked about his future, his potential, his dreams. It was just a woman in my wife's body living in my house, systematically dismantling our life. "Do you understand what you've done?" I asked. "I understand that I'm building a life," she said flatly. and that takes investment." Those words hit me harder than I expected. A life. Not our life. Not Tyler's life. A life. As if she was starting from scratch. As if the last 27 years meant nothing. As if our son was an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to protect. I left the kitchen without saying anything else. There was nothing left to say to her. But in my mind, something shifted, something hardened. The last small hope I'd been holding on to, that maybe this was just a phase, that maybe we could fix this, that maybe she'd snap out of whatever spell Victoria had cast over her, died in that moment. My wife had crossed a line. She'd taken money that didn't belong to her. She'd stolen from our son's future. And she'd done it with the kind of cold certainty that told me she wasn't conflicted about it anymore. She wasn't the woman I married. She was something else now, something driven by ambition and manipulation and the validation of someone who barely knew her. That night, I went to the garage and added the statement to my file. I photographed every page. I documented the dates and amounts. I began making a list of everything Rebecca had taken, not just furniture now, but opportunity. Not just objects, but our son's security. And I made a decision. No more patience. No more hoping she'd come to her senses. No more waiting for her to wake up from whatever spell she was under. It was time to fight back. Not with anger, not with yelling, but with the one thing Victoria hadn't accounted for: documentation, evidence. Truth. I told Rebecca to sit down. She didn't want to. She was moving around the kitchen like she had somewhere to be, something more important to do than listen to her husband of 27 years. But I kept my voice level and firm, and eventually she sat. "This has to stop," I said. "Now, tonight. No more moving furniture. No more accessing accounts that don't belong to you. No more of this." She looked at me with something like contempt. "Stop what exactly?" "Rebecca, Victoria is using you. The money you're taking, that's not a business investment. That's theft. Specifically, Tyler's future. Do you understand what that means legally?" "I'm going to pay it back," she said flatly. "When how you've depleted a college fund that took years to build. You've removed furniture from our home. You're not in control of this situation anymore. Victoria is." For a moment, Rebecca's face showed something, a flicker of doubt maybe, or fear. But it passed quickly, replaced by defensiveness. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "You have no idea what it feels like to be invisible, to be taken for granted, to spend 27 years being someone's wife and nothing else. Victoria sees me. She believes in me. She thinks I can be more than just..." "Than just what?" I interrupted. "Than just the mother of our son. Than just my wife, Rebecca. Those aren't small things. Those aren't things to run away from." "I'm not running away. I'm running towards something. At Tyler's expense," I said quietly. "And at mine. And at the expense of everything we built together." She stood up abruptly. "You don't listen to me. You never have. You get home from work, you're tired, and I'm just background noise. Well, Victoria listens. Victoria sees me." "I see you," I said. "I'm seeing you right now, and what I'm seeing terrifies me because I don't recognize you." "Maybe that's the point," Rebecca said coldly. "Maybe I don't want to be who I was anymore." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd made her choice, and no words from me would change it. She left the kitchen. I heard her go upstairs, heard our bedroom door close, and I sat alone at the table where our family had eaten thousands of meals in a house that was slowly being dismantled, realizing that the woman I'd loved had already left. The body was still here, but the person was gone. I found Tyler on the roof that night. He was sitting near the edge, legs dangling, looking up at the sky. It was the kind of night that exists only in spring, cool, but not cold. the stars bright and clear above the suburbs of Dayton. The kind of night that makes a 15-year-old think about big things. I climbed up quietly and sat down beside him without saying anything. For a while, we just sat together looking at the stars. "Dad," Tyler said eventually, "why aren't you fighting harder? Why are you giving up?" It was the question I'd been expecting. The question that meant my son was suffering, was confused, was losing faith. "I'm not giving up," I said carefully. "But I am choosing my battles carefully. Do you understand the difference?" Tyler didn't answer. So I continued. "When you try to force someone to see the truth, they fight back harder. They entrench themselves. They believe you're the enemy because you won't just let them be. But if you document the truth, if you wait, if you let the consequences do the talking, then justice comes. Not because you fought, but because the truth is stronger than lies. So you're just going to let Mom do whatever she wants?" Tyler asked, and there was anger in his voice. Young, helpless anger. "No," I said. "I'm documenting everything, every transaction, every piece of furniture, every lie. I'm building a case so solid that no one will be able to deny what happened. And you know what's beautiful about that approach?" "What?" "The truth doesn't need your permission to be true. It just is. And eventually, people have to face it." And Tyler was quiet for a long time. I could see him processing this. 15-year-olds aren't supposed to have to think about things like justice and patience and the long game. They're supposed to be worried about homework and girls and whether their hair looks stupid. But Tyler had been forced to grow up faster to understand things that most adults take decades to learn. "I've been keeping records too," he said quietly. "Screenshots, dates, evidence." I felt something catch in my chest. My son had come to the same conclusion I had. He'd understood without me telling him that documentation was power, that truth required witnesses. "I know," I said. "I found your notebook." He looked at me sharply. "You did?" "I did. And I want you to know something, Tyler. What you're doing that takes real strength. Not the kind of strength that shows up in movies or on television. The kind of strength it takes to stay quiet when you want to scream. The kind that takes patience when every instinct tells you to fight. That's the strength of men." Tyler nodded slowly, and for the first time in weeks I saw some of the weight lift from his shoulders. "Now what if it doesn't work? What if she doesn't get caught? What if Victoria—" "Then we know we did everything we could," I said. "We were honest. We didn't compromise. We let the truth speak for itself. That's all any of us can do." In that moment on the rooftop, I felt something shift between us. Not just between me and my son, but within him. Tyler had been carrying the burden of knowledge alone, afraid that his investigation was disloyal, that documenting his mother's actions made him a traitor. He'd been caught between love and truth, and the weight of it was crushing him. But now he understood. He understood that his father wasn't weak, that stepping back wasn't the same as giving up, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was tell the truth, quietly let it breathe, and trust that eventually it would be heard. He didn't know all the details yet. He didn't know about the full scope of his mother's theft, or Victoria's manipulation, or the evidence I was gathering in the garage. But he understood that I was still fighting. I was just fighting differently, and in understanding that my son became a man. While Tyler and I were on the roof seeking clarity from the stars, Rebecca was downstairs in our bedroom, drowning in a silence of her own making. I only learned the intimate details of her internal collapse much later through the depositions and the frantic handwritten journals my lawyer recovered during the discovery phase. But that night, even through the heavy oak door of our master suite, I could sense the structural integrity of her lie beginning to fail. As I came down from the roof, I passed our bedroom. The light was off, but the door was slightly ajar. I didn't go in. Instead, I stood in the shadows of the hallway listening. I could hear the faint, rhythmic pacing of her heels, a restless, anxious sound. I imagined her standing before that full-length mirror, trying to find the vibrant, self-actualized woman Victoria had promised she would become. But according to the notes she wrote that night, notes I would later present to the judge, the woman looking back at her was a ghost. Rebecca had expected to see a success. Instead, she saw a stranger with sunken cheeks and eyes that flickered with a dread she could no longer name. Her hands, she wrote, wouldn't stop shaking. Earlier that evening, I had heard the constant ping of her phone from the kitchen. I didn't know the content then, but the digital records we subpoenaed later revealed she had reached out to Victoria desperate for a shred of the validation she'd been buying with our son's future. "Chew, I miss our talks," she had texted. "Can we grab lunch tomorrow? I need to clear my head." The response, which I later saw in a cold blue light screenshot, was a digital blade. "Too busy. Focus on the inventory. We have clients waiting." Standing in the hallway that night, I heard a sharp, stifled sob, followed by a silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing against the walls. I know now that was the moment the seed of doubt finally broke through. She began to ask herself the questions I had been asking for months. Why did Victoria only care about my access to the bank accounts? Why was every business consultation actually just a list of items to be removed from my own home? I stood there for a long second, my hand hovering inches from the doorknob. I wanted to open it. I wanted to tell her that I saw through the mask and that it wasn't too late to stop the bleeding. But the wall between us was too thick. It wasn't a wall Victoria had built. It was a wall Rebecca and I had constructed ourselves brick by brick through years of "I'm fine" and "I'm just busy with work." Victoria hadn't built the distance. She had simply moved into the empty space we left behind. I heard the old bed springs groan as she sat down heavily. Later, she would confess to her lawyer that she almost walked out to find me in the garage that night. She wanted to confess everything, the stolen furniture, the emptied college fund, the hollow promises. But pride is a cold companion. She stayed behind that closed door, terrified that if she admitted she was a victim of a scam, she would have to admit she had destroyed her family for nothing. We were two people in the same house, separated by 20 feet of hallway and 27 years of unspoken regrets. I went back to the garage to document her betrayals while she sat in the dark, finally realizing she wasn't Victoria's partner. She was a mark, a source of cash, a fading asset. The house felt like an empty shell that night. The silence wasn't peace. It was the sound of a life being dismantled from the inside out. Thank you for staying with me this far. Please comment to let me know you're still here. The next part will tell about the night I walked into my garage and closed the door on mercy. That's when I understood justice doesn't come from revenge, but from integrity. That night I slept better than I had in months. Not because I was happy, not because I was vindicated, but because I'd finally stopped pretending. I'd finally stopped hoping that Rebecca would wake up. I'd finally stopped trying to save her from herself. Sometimes, the most merciful thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. I'd spent 27 years trying to be a good husband, trying to provide, trying to show up, trying to be present even when work consumed me. I'd invested decades in a marriage, in a partnership, in a shared future. But Rebecca had made her choice, and I was finally making mine. I would let her have everything material. Let her think she'd won. Let her walk into that courtroom believing she'd come out victorious. And then, when the exhibits were presented, when the truth was laid out, when the judge asked her to explain the missing college fund, and the furniture and the storage unit, and the web of lies that Victoria had woven and Rebecca had followed, then she would understand. The price of her choices wasn't the loss of material things. Material things could always be replaced. The price was the loss of her relationship with her son. The loss of respect. The loss of the life she could have had if she'd just looked in the mirror, really looked, and recognized herself before it was too late. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply not trying to save her anymore. In that garage, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's choices, I closed the door on mercy. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no tears, no rage, no moment of violent clarity. It was just a quiet decision made by a tired man who had finally understood that patience without boundaries is just passivity. I would let her take everything. I would sign away the house and the cars and the savings. I would make it easy for her. I would be the reasonable one in the eyes of the law. And in doing so, I would protect the one thing that mattered most, my son's future. Not just financially, but emotionally. Tyler would grow up knowing that his father had fought for him, not with fists or raised voices, but with truth, with documentation, with the quiet certainty that comes from knowing you're on the right side of justice. I picked up the box of evidence and carried it inside the house. I placed it on the kitchen table where we'd eaten countless family meals, where Rebecca had sat and told me about her dreams, where we'd discussed Tyler's future and his college fund and all the things we thought we'd build together. And I thought, this is what it comes down to. Not love, not passion, not even anger, just evidence, just truth. Just the quiet certainty that justice, when it finally comes, will be all the more powerful for having waited. In the weeks that followed my decision, Rebecca became bolder and more reckless. She withdrew another $15,000 from our joint account money that was supposed to be for emergencies, for our retirement, for the life we'd planned together. Then she went back a week later and took another $8,000. When I checked the balance online, I took a screenshot, added it to the file. She brought movers to the house on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. They came for the paintings on the walls, the lamps from the bedrooms, even the kitchen fixtures, the ones that were bolted to the counters. I found the receipt for the moving company on her desk. Another screenshot, another piece of the puzzle. She barely came home anymore. She'd leave in the morning and return late at night, smelling of perfume and ambition, and the particular kind of confidence that comes from believing you're finally winning. She'd pass Tyler in the hallway without acknowledging him. She'd take a shower and go to bed. No conversation, no inquiry about his day, no mothering, just absence. Victoria kept texting her. I saw the messages sometimes when Rebecca left her phone on the kitchen counter. You deserve this new life. Stop holding yourself back. Your husband clearly doesn't appreciate you, but I do. Each message a small cut designed to sever the last threads of connection between Rebecca and the life she'd built. Rebecca believed her. Believed that my silence meant surrender. Believed that my refusal to fight meant I'd finally accepted that she was leaving. Believed that she was winning. She made plans to take the house in the divorce settlement. She told me this casually one evening, as if she was telling me about a movie she'd seen. I'm keeping the Wrenwood house, she said. It's the only thing that matters. Okay, I said. And I meant it. I was okay with it. What she didn't know was that I was also documenting the fact that she'd been moving our furniture to that house, furniture that didn't belong to her, that had been part of our joint assets, that she was now claiming for herself. What she didn't know was that every single item she moved was another piece of evidence, another thread in the tapestry of theft and betrayal. She didn't know that I'd hired a private investigator to photograph the furniture in the properties where her staging business was supposedly happening. Didn't know that those photos showed that none of our furniture was actually being staged. It was being sold. Sold to clients who thought they were buying professionally curated pieces, not family heirlooms stolen from a house in Dayton. Rebecca thought she was being clever, She thought she was finally free. She had no idea that every step she took was being recorded, every withdrawal tracked, every item cataloged, every lie documented. What Rebecca also didn't know was that she was being watched from two angles. In the garage, I continued my documentation. I'd created a spreadsheet, the kind of meticulous, obsessive record-keeping that comes from years of inspecting buildings, of cataloging defects and damage and structural failures. Each piece of furniture had its own line item: photograph, date taken, estimated value, current location based on the staging photos Victoria posted online, status of sale if applicable. Upstairs in his bedroom, Tyler was doing something similar. My son had expanded his investigation. He'd begun tracking not just what his mother was taking, but where it was going. He'd created a folder on his laptop organized by date and item. He'd even, and this broke my heart a little when I discovered it, calculated the total value of what was missing. He'd written it down in that notebook of his: $147,000 in furniture, $60,000 in liquid assets, future college fund $85,000, total $222,000. A 15-year-old shouldn't have to quantify the theft of his own future. But Tyler had. Because he understood in a way that most children don't, that numbers don't lie. That evidence is love. That documentation is sometimes the only way to protect the people you care about. We never discussed it directly. Father and son both gathering evidence, both building a case, both understanding that when the moment came, when Rebecca realized she'd been wrong, when Victoria was exposed, when the courtroom doors opened, they would have everything they needed. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew. As the weeks turned into months, and as Rebecca grew more confident in her victory, the house became even emptier. Not just of furniture, but of her presence. She became a ghost, a figure that moved through our home at odd hours, taking what she wanted, and leaving only absence behind. Tyler would come home from school and find rooms stripped bare. He'd walk through the living room where the couch used to be and feel the loss of it, not just as an object, but as a symbol. This house, which had been a home, was being dismantled piece by piece. He'd come find me in the garage, and without saying anything, he'd show me a new screenshot, a new discovery, a new piece of evidence. I'd nod, and he'd nod back, and we'd both understand that we were doing this together. Not through conversation, not through explicit agreement, but through the shared language of documentation, of patience, of knowing that truth has its own timeline. Rebecca didn't see any of this. She was too busy planning her new life, too busy listening to Victoria, too busy believing that silence meant surrender. But she was wrong. The silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. It was the patience of a man who understands that justice doesn't arrive on your schedule. It arrives when the truth is finally undeniable. Rebecca had no idea I was still watching. She thought my lack of argument meant acceptance. She thought my refusal to engage in conflict meant weakness. She thought the fact that I signed documents without reading them closely meant I didn't care about the outcomes. She was wrong about all of it. I was watching her every move. I was documenting her every theft. I was cataloging her every betrayal. And I was waiting for the moment when all of it, all the evidence, all the documentation, all the quiet, methodical collection of truth would finally be presented. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of love for my son, out of respect for the truth, out of the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply let people face the consequences of their choices. Rebecca was taking everything: the house, the furniture, the cars, the money. She was taking it all, believing she'd won. But what she didn't understand was that in taking everything material, she was losing everything that mattered. She was losing her relationship with her son. She was losing the respect of people who mattered. She was losing herself to a narrative that Victoria had written for her. And in a few short weeks, when those courtroom doors opened, she would see that finally. She would understand. But by then, it would be too late to take any of it back. The night before the hearing, I was alone in our empty house. Rebecca had moved out completely. The last pieces of furniture had been removed weeks ago. The walls were bare. The hardwood floors echoed when I walked across them. It felt like walking through a tomb, a monument to a life that had ended officially and finally with the filing of divorce papers. But instead of despair, what I felt was clarity. I walked through the house like a building inspector doing a final walkthrough before certification. I was examining the structure of my own life, room by room, wall by wall, looking for the damage, cataloging what remained, understanding what it all meant. I started in the living room where the couch used to sit, that enormous sectional in charcoal gray that Rebecca's mother had given us. 15 years of wear on the fabric. Thousands of hours of family time. Movie nights, arguments, reconciliations. All of it absorbed into that piece of furniture that Rebecca had decided was worth more as inventory than as home. The space where it sat was marked by a ghost, the exact shape of it still visible in the carpet, slightly more faded than the rest of the floor. Evidence of what had been. An archaeological record of loss. I moved to the dining room where the table used to be. The one we'd bought in that antique shop in Cincinnati. The one we'd refinished together when we first got married, staying up late with sandpaper and stain, laughing at how bad we were at it. That table had held Thanksgivings and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday dinners where nothing special happened, but everything mattered. The room was empty except for dust motes floating in the dark. I climbed the stairs and went to Tyler's room. Unlike the rest of the house, this room still had furniture. His bed, his desk, his bookshelf. Rebecca hadn't touched anything in here, perhaps out of some remnant of motherhood, or perhaps just because Victoria hadn't instructed her to. Either way, this room was preserved, a monument to the child she'd left behind. I stood in the doorway and looked at the wall above his door. The pencil marks were still there. Years of them. Small lines marking his height year after year. His name and the date next to each one. A record of growth. Proof that time had passed. Evidence of a child becoming a man. I reached up and touched the highest mark. My hand fit exactly there at the height he'd reached when he was 15, when his mother had started disappearing, when he'd started understanding that he had to document her betrayal to protect himself. I stood there for a long time, my hand on that pencil mark, and I thought about what it meant to love someone enough to let them fail, to let them face consequences, to stand aside and let truth do the fighting. My phone rang at 10:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Catherine. "James," she said, and her voice was different, clearer, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "I know I'm calling late, but I needed to tell you before tomorrow." "Tell me what?" I asked, though I already knew something had changed. "I've known about Victoria for weeks," Catherine said. I started paying attention to her after we talked, after I realized something wasn't right. "I hired a private investigator of my own. James, she's been running this scheme for years. Multiple women, multiple divorces. She positions herself as a confidant, gains their trust, then systematically separates them from their assets while they're emotionally vulnerable." I sat down on the edge of Tyler's bed and listened. "Victoria told me she was doing the same thing to your wife," Catherine continued. "I didn't want to believe it at first. She's my daughter, but the evidence... James, the evidence is overwhelming. She's been documenting everything. Screenshots of conversations where she's explicitly coaching Rebecca on how to hide assets. Bank records showing that she's been taking a percentage of everything Rebecca removes from your home. It's organized. It's calculated. It's criminal." "Catherine," I said quietly. "Wait." she interrupted. There's more. I went back and looked at our relationship, at why I felt abandoned by you all these years. And James, I realized, I let Victoria convince me of a story that wasn't true. You didn't abandon me. You were busy. You were working. But you also called on my birthday. You sent money when Richard and I had financial problems. You were there. I wanted more. I wanted to feel special. And Victoria used that against me. Catherine. I'm sorry, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice now. I'm so sorry for letting her manipulate me, for not seeing what she was doing to you and Rebecca and Tyler. But James, I'm coming to the hearing tomorrow. I'm bringing everything I have. Screenshots of her instructions to Rebecca, bank records showing the money she's been skimming, testimony from another woman, a client of Victoria's from 3 years ago, who went through the exact same thing. Victoria is going to be exposed tomorrow, and I'm going to be the one doing the exposing. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was thinking about all the years of distance between us, about the invisible wall built by both of us, about how Victoria had widened that gap using our mutual hurt as a weapon against us both. Thank you, I finally said, for investigating, for coming, for seeing the truth. I should have seen it sooner, Catherine said, but I see it now, and tomorrow everyone will see it too. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of Tyler's room, surrounded by the evidence of his childhood, and I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but something like resolution, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Catherine was coming. She was bringing evidence. She was going to testify against her own daughter, an act of courage that required her to face the ways she'd been manipulated, to acknowledge her own vulnerabilities, to finally see clearly. And tomorrow, when those courtroom doors opened, Victoria's scheme would fall apart. Not because I'd fought her, not because I'd been angry or vengeful, but because the truth, when finally revealed, is simply undeniable. I left Tyler's room and went back downstairs to the empty living room. I stood in the middle of it, in the space where the couch used to be, and I performed one final inspection. This was the structure of my life. This was what remained after everything that could be taken had been taken. An empty house. A son who loved me despite the pain I couldn't protect him from. A sister who'd finally seen through lies to find the truth. Evidence that documented not just Rebecca's crimes, but the entire architecture of Victoria's manipulation. I was standing in the ruins of 27 years of marriage. And instead of despair, I felt something like pride. Not pride in the marriage itself that had failed, but pride in how I'd handled the failure, with patience, with dignity, with the unwavering commitment to truth that I'd tried to teach my son on that rooftop. I had been tested, and I had not broken. I had been lied to, and I had not given up. I had been betrayed, and I had responded not with rage, but with documentation, with the careful, methodical gathering of truth that would stand up in a courtroom and speak for itself. Tomorrow, when the judge asked questions, the evidence would answer them. When lawyers presented exhibits, those exhibits would tell the story clearly. When Victoria tried to defend herself, her own words captured in screenshots and emails and bank records would prove her guilt. This was power. Not the kind that came from yelling or fighting or refusing to back down, but the kind that came from knowing you were right, from trusting the truth, from understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand there quiet and steady and let reality speak for itself. As we walked toward the courtroom that morning, Rebecca approached me in the hallway. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who'd spent months transforming herself into someone new was now transformed by something else entirely: exhaustion, desperation, the weight of accumulated choices finally catching up. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair, which she'd cut and styled and maintained so carefully, hung limp around her face. The new clothes, the expensive ones she'd bought with money from accounts that weren't hers, seemed to hang on her frame now as if she'd lost weight. Or perhaps she'd just lost herself. "Jim," she whispered, and her voice was so small it barely carried across the hallway. "Can we talk?" I glanced toward the courtroom doors. Tom was waiting for me. Catherine would be arriving any moment. The evidence was ready. The exhibits were prepared. Everything was in place. But I stopped and looked at my wife, at the woman I'd shared 27 years with, who'd chosen Victoria over her son, over me, over the life we'd built together, and I waited for her to speak. "I know I've been wrong," Rebecca said, and tears were already running down her face. "I know I was manipulated. Victoria, she was never my friend. She was just using me to get at your money, to use your things, to—" Her voice broke. "She didn't care about me at all, James. She just wanted what I could give her." I stood there listening to my wife finally see clearly, and I felt a familiar weight in my chest. Not anger, not triumph, just sadness. The sadness of watching someone arrive at the truth too late to change anything. "I've known that for months," I said quietly. "I've known that Victoria was manipulating you since the beginning. I tried to tell you. I warned you. I asked you to stop." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming now. I know you did. And I didn't listen. I was so desperate to feel like someone valued me that I believed her lies instead of you." "Yes," I said. "You did." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said. "I'm so sorry, James. I'm sorry for taking the money. I'm sorry for emptying the college fund. I'm sorry for everything. I want to make it right. I want to—" "Rebecca," I interrupted gently. "I believe that you're sorry now. But sorrow for getting caught is not the same as sorrow for what you've done." She looked at me confused. "If I hadn't documented everything," I continued, "if I hadn't gathered the evidence, if you hadn't known that I would present it here today in front of a judge, you wouldn't be sorry. You'd still be with Victoria, still taking more, still lying to yourself about what she was doing to you. You're sorry because you finally understand the consequences, not because you've truly changed." Rebecca flinched as if I'd struck her. "And there's something more important," I said. "You stole from your son, Rebecca. You took his college fund, the one thing we'd both committed to protecting. The one thing that was supposed to be guaranteed. And when Tyler tried to ask you about it, when he tried to understand what was happening, you dismissed him. You made him feel like he was wrong for questioning you." Tears continued to stream down Rebecca's face, but she didn't interrupt. "Tyler is 15 years old, and because of your choices, he's had to grow up. He's had to document his own mother's betrayal to protect himself. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you've taken from him, that money can never replace?" "I didn't mean," Rebecca started. "Intention doesn't matter anymore," I said. "What matters is what you did. And what you did was hurt the one person who loved you unconditionally." Rebecca sank slightly, as if the weight of understanding was too much to carry. "What can I do?" she asked desperately. "How can I fix this?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the woman I'd married once buried beneath the choices she'd made. I saw the good person she might have been if she'd been stronger, if she'd listened, if she'd valued what she had instead of chasing what she didn't. "I wanted to forgive you," I said, and my voice was gentle because it was true. "I've spent months wanting to find a way to forgive you, but forgiveness isn't mine to give right now. What you did to Tyler, what you did to our family, that's not mine to absolve. That's between you and your son, And you'll have to earn his forgiveness through years of showing him that you've changed. Not through apologies, through action. I can try, Rebecca said. You can, I agreed. But first you have to face what you've done. You have to stand in that courtroom and tell the truth. Not the story Victoria taught you. Not the version where you're a victim. The truth. All of it. Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding finally settling into her eyes. We stood in that hallway in the space between the old life and whatever came next, and I felt the last thread of hope between us finally break. Not with violence, not with anger, just with clarity, with the understanding that some rifts once created cannot be easily repaired, that some trust once broken takes years to rebuild, that some damage, the damage done to a 15-year-old who should never have had to protect himself from his own mother, cannot be undone with apologies. Rebecca wanted redemption. She wanted to say she was sorry and have that be enough. But the world doesn't work that way. Justice doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. I could have told her that it would all be okay, that she'd be forgiven, that our family would heal and move forward together. But that would have been a lie, and she'd already heard enough lies. Go talk to your lawyer, I said gently. Prepare yourself for what's coming. And Rebecca, tell the truth. That's the only thing that will matter now. She nodded, and I watched her walk away, a woman reduced to the consequences of her choices, finally understanding what it cost to betray the people who loved you. I turned toward the courtroom doors where Tom was waiting for me, where Catherine was about to arrive, where the evidence was prepared, where Tyler would sit in the gallery and watch his mother finally be held accountable, and where finally the truth would speak. I didn't hate Rebecca. I want that to be clear. I pitied her. I was sad for her. I recognized in her the vulnerability that Victoria had exploited, the desperate need to be seen to matter, to be more than invisible. But pity and forgiveness are not the same thing. And compassion doesn't mean excusing what someone has done. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. Let them sit with their decisions. Let them understand fully and finally what it cost to betray the people who loved them. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And that's what Rebecca needed, not forgiveness, but the hard truth that actions have consequences, and that the road back from betrayal is long and steep and can only be walked alone. Then my lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we have exhibits to present. What followed was systematic. Tom presented 47 photographs, our furniture appearing in staging photos, supposedly temporary inventory. Instead sold to clients who didn't know they were buying stolen family heirlooms. Bank statements followed. Unauthorized withdrawals totaling $255,500. The storage unit violation report. And finally, the screenshots, Victoria explicitly coaching Rebecca on how to extract assets. Judge Klein examined each piece carefully. The courtroom was silent. Mr. Patterson, the judge asked, were you aware of these withdrawals? I stood. Yes, Your Honor. I documented everything. I could have fought, but I chose to gather truth instead. I let her take what she wanted so the consequences would be undeniable. Then Tyler stood. He walked to the bench and handed Judge Klein his notebook, the meticulous record of a 15-year-old documenting his mother's betrayal to protect himself. The judge's expression softened as he read. When he looked up at Tyler, it was with deep respect. Young man, you've shown remarkable maturity. Your father was right to teach you that truth is powerful. Tyler nodded and returned to his seat. Catherine stood next from the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, I'm Victoria Harmon's mother. I'm here to testify that my daughter is a predator. She targets vulnerable women in failing marriages. She separates them from their assets systematically. This is not the first time she's done this. Catherine presented evidence of Victoria's pattern: other women, other divorces, years of calculated theft. Her own testimony was devastating precisely because it was factual, not emotional. Rebecca made a small sound. Then she stood, and her legs seemed to fail her. She stumbled toward me, not to attack, but because I was the only solid thing left in her collapsing world. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm sorry." I looked at her and saw a woman finally seeing herself in the mirror of justice, a woman understanding too late that she'd traded everything that mattered for the validation of someone who'd never cared about her at all. Judge Klein allowed a moment, then began his verdict. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds Mrs. Foster is solely responsible for the removal of $285,500 in assets and the unauthorized withdrawal of the entire college fund. She must restore these funds within 30 days. All storage unit violations, tax liabilities, and business penalties are her responsibility alone. Custody of Tyler Patterson is awarded to Mr. Patterson. Mrs. Foster will have supervised visitation only. The house at Wrenwood Drive is awarded to Mrs. Foster along with $50,000 in marital assets. All liabilities remain hers. Mr. Patterson retains his residence and $150,000 in marital assets. Evidence of criminal fraud is referred to the district attorney. Ms. Victoria Harmon will be prosecuted separately. The gavel came down. 3 months later, Tyler and I were living in a small apartment on the east side of Dayton. On Sunday mornings, we made pancakes together, a ritual that had become sacred. We'd stand hip to hip at the stove, and one morning Tyler broke the silence. "Dad, thank you for not fighting back, for not trying to destroy her." I set down the spatula. There was a moment when I wanted to, but I realized you needed to see that strength isn't about winning. It's about standing firm. "I learned something from documenting everything," Tyler said. "The truth is powerful. You don't need to yell or fight if you just keep a record of what's real." I smiled. My 15-year-old son had learned what takes most people decades to understand. Rebecca got the house she wanted along with bankruptcy within 6 months. Victoria disappeared, moving to her next victim. Catherine returned to San Francisco as a different person, her relationship with me slowly healing. Victoria faced criminal fraud charges as other victims came forward. And Tyler, he grew up understanding something rare, that real strength isn't about winning. It's about standing firm for what matters. It's about documenting truth and letting it speak. It's about choosing integrity even when nobody's watching. People ask if I regret giving Rebecca everything. The answer is always no. Because true strength doesn't lie in victory. It lies in standing firm for what matters, in documenting truth and letting it speak for itself, in choosing integrity over revenge, in teaching your son that the most powerful person in the room isn't the one who yells loudest. It's the one who stands quiet and steady and trusts that justice will arrive. I didn't win the divorce. Justice did. I didn't defeat Victoria. Truth did. I saved my son. And in that I saved the part of myself that mattered most. I write this story not to recount a victory. I write to share a lesson I paid a terrible price to learn. Years have passed, and I realize that if you're in a similar situation, remember, don't be like me when I was younger. Don't ignore the early signs of distance in your marriage. I was consumed by work and forgot that family needs presence, not promises. This is the first lesson God taught me through this pain. The second lesson I learned from my life is this: trust in truth rather than husband revenge. When I discovered Rebecca was pulling Tyler into wrongdoing, I could have been angry. I could have pursued husband revenge for years, creating endless family drama. Instead, I chose to stand firm. God taught me that justice comes from integrity, not retaliation. Finally, what I want to tell you is this. If you're going through painful family drama, whether divorce, betrayal, or loss, remember that God never leaves you alone. I didn't find the strength to survive through anger or blind desire for husband revenge. I found it by standing firm in what was right. I found it by teaching my son that family drama can destroy, but integrity is eternal. The truth doesn't require your permission to be true. It simply is. And eventually, people must face it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Here's my question for you. If you, like me, had to choose between quick victory or long-term truth, which would you choose? Please comment below so I know you're walking this journey with me. Warning: the next story will contain some fictional elements crafted for educational purposes to reflect lessons from real life. If you'd rather not hear stories with similar family drama themes, please exit and choose other content that suits you better.